Alright guys, I got my highlifter 2-inch lift, 3.5-inch lift in today. I installed it. Install was pretty easy, not as easy as some bracket lifts. I'll give you some tips and tricks. So here's the front. This is a short bracket, it only goes to there. That's a long bracket, you can see it goes all the way across. Same way a lot of these lifts work for the Rubicon and so on. One thing that was kind of tricky was this spacer right here will not fit in there unless you spread open the shock tabs. So those are your factory shock tabs here and here. So you got to spread those open. I did it with a pry bar, pretty easy to spread those apart, and the spacer goes in there nice and easy. Also, it's kind of tight. You see how close this spacer fits to the frame and the nut fits to the frame and stuff? That just makes it kind of a pain in the butt because it's so tight. Let me show you the other side. The other side's even worse due to where the battery box is. It's even tighter. So that's not super premium. See how tight that is? That all barely fits, but it does. The way they did it is very strong though, really nice thick brackets, not going to go anywhere. You can see that they really made a big relocation of the upper shock mount. Stock shock mount is here, lifted shock mount is all the way out here. That's a huge difference. And they moved it straight out, which we know makes it a lot stiffer. But we prefer that because it adds some stiffness, but you don't get too much down travel. And the result is that your front seats aren't at that bad of an angle at full down travel on the front lift. So I like the front lift. It's gonna ride a little stiff, but not too bad. They did a good job with it. To make it a lot less stiff, I put the clicker at the minimum setting. But front lift was pretty good. Kind of tricky to install, but whatever. I also decided to add a spacer in between here and here. So that's the small bracket and that's the frame tab. I put a spacer in there because otherwise, when you tighten it down, the bracket kind of twists into that void there. They didn't come with a spacer. I added one. I just took one of these AA spacers I had from another lift and added it there. And that made everything tighten down a little nicer. But you don't have to do that. It's just something I did that they should have done. Now the problem is with the rear lift. It's extremely easy to install. I mean, literally I could do the whole rear lift in 10 minutes. But let me get from the back views to show you what I'm talking about. They did something kind of stupid. So they took the stock shock mount, which was here, and they moved it to here. Now, why would they do that? Because in the front, they took the shock mount and they moved it out. In the rear, they took the shock mount and they moved it in and down. Well, they did it for a really lazy reason. So there's two ways to lift a machine, right? You can either increase down travel or you can increase stiffness, so have less sag. What they did here was they increased down travel, which is a problem because the back already has pretty steep angles at max down travel, and now they're obnoxious. I'll show you what they look like in a minute. Also, so the reason they did that is because if they were to make this mount out here and kick the shock this way, it would have interfered with this bracket at full down travel. And rather than have you trim a little bracket or give you a new bracket, they just did that. So you can see these holes. I drilled these as an experiment to try to fix this issue, but they didn't work out because the shock mount bushing is so big it hits this bolt. So there's just not enough metal to do that. If the metal came out to here, I could make it work. So I might have to weld on it or make a new bracket myself or something. But it mounts up here and here and it ties down here with a nice spacer. So it's very stout, very sturdy, but it's not a great design because it's got way too much down travel. And it actually makes the suspension a little softer. And that's not what you want for mud riding because you're going to be full of mud, your suspension is going to be sagging and all that. So I'm going to jack it up real quick and show you how terrible these angles are. So from the factory, it had a lot of down travel, a lot of sag going on. Now it has just way too much. Yeah, it's still going up. Tires not off the ground yet. Tires still not off the ground. I'm hitting the garage door. All right, tires are off the ground. So look at those CV angles. That's the kind of angles you run when you're running, you know, King Cobras. That is not the kind of angles you run on stock axles. And as far as I know, there's no aftermarket axles out for this thing yet, so that's not going to work. That's going to cause issues eventually, even on these little 28s. So I'm going to probably have to run limiting straps the way it is now, or take it off and add a spring spacer, which I don't really want to do because it'll make these more coil bound at full compression, or not full compression, static sag. Or I can make a new bracket to move it out here and do some trimming and move the brake line over so I can make it to where the shock gets real close so that bracket doesn't hit it. This is the problem because it's got these giant fat load leveling shocks. And load leveling is cool, it works great. You know, I think I like it. A lot of people complain about it, but I don't know what's going to happen if I add a spacer in here, if it's going to mess with the load leveling. From what I understand, it mostly functions off of your how much travel you are and where you're at in the travel, so I don't think the spring stiffness should affect it too much. But anyways, so there's the ground clearance at full down travel. Now, they say this is a 3.5-inch lift. That's total bullshit. In the front, it's a 2.5-inch lift. The way to measure it is to install it, drive it around the block a few times, park it slowly, don't slam the brakes, get out and measure everything. So It is a 2.5 inch lift in the front, and in the rear, it is only a 2-inch lift. They call it a 3.5 probably because they're doing their measurements at max down travel. So you have 3.5 inches more max down travel in the rear, I'm guessing. I don't know where they get the numbers from. But as you can see, I already have a ripped CV boot, so I ordered a new axle from Yamaha. I'm going to rebuild that one as a spare. But this rear lift is just not going to cut it. I'm probably going to take it off right now because that's just not going to be reliable with that much down travel. Now, when you set it down, obviously it's got a lot of sag, right? So it's going to squat even more than that once I roll it around. But it's just not a good idea. When I first saw it, I thought, okay, yeah, this is nice. Maybe they did that to make it ride better. And when I realized what they did, I was just like, nope, they're just being lazy. They didn't want to have to deal with that interference issue and have you drill through the frame or anything. Basically, they wanted to make it as cheap as possible and as easy to install as possible, so they did it this way, which is not quite the right way. Be fine for most people. Most people don't pay attention to this stuff. Most people don't ride hard enough to really get to full down travel and pop an axle, but I guarantee I will. So I'm gonna have to do something different with this lift. The front is good. I suspect it's gonna ride a little stiff, but I'm probably just gonna deal with it and leave it the way it is. Angles are good. That's about how much lift I wanted anyway, so happy with the front. The rear is gonna need some work. If anything, I want it stiffer, because I always have 2 passengers in the back pretty much. I'm gonna have a cooler, straps, whatever, a whole cargo box back here full of stuff, so I want the shocks to go out more for more stiffness, if anything, not have them come in. But you know, for the average person, it's probably fine. It was cheap to install, and this lift is going to affect stability. Also, look at these sway bar link angles. So that's not too bad, but at full down travel, that thing's almost, you know, these 2 links are almost parallel. And if they're parallel, that means they can't put any force on each other. So they should have given you at least a 1.5 or 2 inch bracket to drop the sway bar down, or a longer sway bar link. So that's something else I'm gonna have to address. I think my solution for now is probably just gonna be to add some limiting straps and then cut these and lengthen these sway bar links, because relocating that's going to be kind of a pain in the butt. You don't have a whole lot of room. Without drilling through the frame, it's actually going to be pretty tricky to relocate the sway bar. But yeah, there's my opinion on the lift. It's not a 3.5, it's a 2 1/4 average or something. 2.5 front, 2-inch rear. That's all over the internet. If you don't trust me, everyone else has said the same thing. 3.5 inch lift would be way too much anyways though. On the stock axle in the rear, if you set it up perfect with limiting straps, you could probably get 3 inches out of them fairly reliably, but that's it. I mean, it's a heavy machine and the axles aren't that beefy from the factory. So there you go.